After the Battle of the Ancre, British attacks on the Somme front were stopped during inclement weather. For the rest of the year and early January 1917, military operations by both sides were mostly restricted to surviving the rain, snow, fog, mud fields, waterlogged trenches and shell holes. As preparations for the offensive at Arras continued, the British attempted to keep German attention on the Somme front. The Fifth Army was instructed by Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig to prepare systematic attacks to capture portions of the German defences. Short advances could progressively uncover the remaining German positions in the Ancre Valley, threaten the German hold on the village of Serre to the north and expose German positions beyond to ground observation. Artillery fire could be directed with greater accuracy by ground observers and make overlooked German defences untenable. A more ambitious plan for the spring was an attack into the salient that had formed north of Bapaume. During the Battle of the Somme in 1916, the attack was to be directed northwards from the Ancre Valley and southwards from the original front line, near Arras, to meet at St. Leger. As soon as the ground dried and was intended to combine with the effect of the offensive planned at Arras, British operations on the Ancre from the 10th of January to the 22nd of February 1917 forced the Germans back 5 miles on a 4 miles front. Ahead, the scheduled German retirements of the Alberic Bewegung and eventually took 5,284 prisoners. On 22-23 February, the Germans fell back another 3 miles on a 15-mile front. The Germans then withdrew from much of the I Stellung to the R2 Stellung on the 11th of March, forestalling a British attack, which went unnoticed by the British until dark on the 12th of March. The main German withdrawal further south from the Noyon salient to the Hindenburg line commenced on schedule on the 16th of March. Background: German defences. By the end of 1916, the German defences on the south bank of the Ancre Valley had been pushed back from the original front line of the 1st of July 1916 and were based on the sites of fortified villages, connected by networks of trenches, most on reverse slopes sheltered from observation from the south and obscured from the north by the convex nature of the slopes. On the north bank, the Germans had retained most of the Beaumont-Hamel spur, beyond which to the north were the original front-line defences, running west of Serre northwards to Gommecourt and Monchy-au-Bois. The Germans had built I Stellung, a double line of trenches and barbed wire several miles further back, as a new second line of defense along the ridge north of the Ancre Valley. The line ran from Essarts to Bacoy, west of Achitla-Petit, Loupart-Wood, south of Gravelines, west of Bapaume, Le Transloy to Sailly-Sailly-Zoul. On the reverse slope of that ridge, R2 Stellung ran from Ablain-Civelle to west of Logiste-Wood, west of Achitla-Grand, western outskirts of Bapaume, Roquigny, Le Mesnil and Arras to Vaux-Wood. R3 Stellung branched from R2 Stellung at Achitla-Grand and ran clockwise around Bapaume, then south to Buny, Ytres, Nolo and Temple-la-Fosse. The First Army held the Somme front, from the Somme River north to Gommecourt, and had a similar number of troops to the British opposite, with 10 divisions in reserve. On the night of 1/2 January, a German attack captured Hope Post near the Beaumont-Hamel road, before being lost with another post on the night of 5/6 January. British positions. The Fifth Army held about 10 miles of the Somme front in January 1917, from Les Sars westwards to the Grandcourt-Thiepval road, across the Ancre east of Beaucourt, along the lower slopes of the Beaumont-Hamel spur, to the original front line south of the Serre road. north to Gomecourt Park. The right flank was held by 4th Corps up to the north side of the Ancre River, with the 13th Corps on the north bank up to the boundary with the 3rd Army. 2nd Corps and 5th Corps were in reserve, resting, training and preparing to relieve the Corps in line around 7 to 21 February, except for the divisional artilleries, which were to be joined by those of the relieving divisions, and advanced to close up to the Le Trans-Loy-Loupart line, which ran from Essarts to Bacoy, west of Achitla-Petit, Loupart Wood, south of Gravelines, west of Bapaume. Le Trans-Loy to Sailly-Saint-Lizel had been the first objective of British operations in the Ancre Valley after the capture of Beaumont Hamel in late 1916. Operations began with an attack on the 18th of November, before the deterioration of the ground made operations impossible. Ground had been gained on a 5,000-yard front south of the Ancre and positions improved on Redden Ridge on the north bank. Over the winter, the Fifth Army submitted plans to General Headquarters, which were settled in mid-February, after Joffre was replaced by General Robert Nivelle and the changes of strategy caused by the French decision to fight a decisive battle on the Aisne. The obvious difficulties of the Germans on the Ancre front made it important to prevent the Germans from withdrawing to the new defences being built behind the Noyon salient in their own time. A retirement could disrupt the British offensive at Arras, and Franco-British planning gained urgency as a German withdrawal became likely in February and March. According to the results of air reconnaissance agent reports and gleanings from prisoners, reaching a good position for an attack on the Bihacourt line, which ran from Ablain-Civelle to west of Logiste-Wood, west of Achitla-Grand, western outskirts of Bapaume, Roquigny, Le Mesnil and Arras to Vaux-Wood. The Fifth Army objective was to be attacked 3 days before the Arras offensive, and the army then to advance to Saint-Leger, to meet the Third Army and trap the Germans in the positions southwest of Arras. The first stage was to be an attack on the 17th of February, in which 2nd Corps was to capture Hill 130. Gerd Trench and the Butte of Wallencourt was to be captured by 1st Anzac Corps on the 1st of March, and Serre was to be taken by 5th Corps on the 7th of March, which would then extend its right flank to the Ancre to relieve the 63rd Division of 2nd Corps and capture Miramont by the 10th of March. These operations would lead to the attack on the Bihacourt line by 2nd Corps and 1st Anzac Corps. These arrangements were maintained until the 24th of February, when German local withdrawals in the Ancre Valley required the Fifth Army divisions to make a general advance to regain contact. Prelude. Winter on the Somme. The state of the ground on the Somme front became much worse in November 1916, when constant rain fell and the ground, which had been churned by shell fire since June, turned to deep mud again. The ground in the Ancre Valley was in the worst condition, a wilderness of mud, flooded trenches, shell hole posts, corpses and broken equipment, overlooked and vulnerable to sniping from German positions. Little could be done beyond holding the line and frequently relieving troops, who found the physical and mental strain almost unbearable. Supplies had to be moved up by soldiers at night to avoid sniping by German infantry and artillery fire. Horses in transport units were used as pack animals and died when the oat ration was reduced to 6 pounds per day. The weather slightly improved in January, and on the 14th of January, the temperature fell enough to freeze the ground. On the south side of the Ancre Valley near Courcelette, the 51st Division took over from the 4th Canadian Division on the 27th of November. The division had only just been relieved from the line on the north bank, after the Battle of the Ancre, with very little time for rest. Constant rain wet the ground so badly that horses drowned and men became stuck up to the waists. In December, ropes were issued to drag soldiers out of the mud. New trenches collapsed as they were dug in the front, and support lines were held by shell-hole posts, which became islands of squalor, as duckboards and ration boxes used as platforms sank under the mud. Cooking became impossible and movement in daylight suicidal. There were epidemics of dysentery, trench foot and frostbite. Old wounds open. Morale plummeted, and moving about after dark led to working parties, runners, reliefs and ration parties getting lost and wandering around until exhausted. No man's land was not wired on this part of the front, and British and German troops blundered into the wrong positions, Germans being taken prisoner on 6 occasions. Some dugouts in Regina Trench were usable, but conditions in the artillery lines were as bad as the front line, with ammunition being delivered by pack horse under German artillery fire. Elephant shelters were placed in the front line, sunk below trench and shell-hole parapets. Larger shelters were dug into the sides of roads further back, and only a minimal number of troops kept in the front zone. After 3 weeks' work, positions in the front line had been improved, and a frost made the ground harder, until a thaw made the ground even worse than before. The 51st Division stores obtained enough gumboots for a brigade of infantry, but many were lost in the mud as men struggled to get free. The division wore Highland kilts, which left the top of the leg bare underneath, and the edges of the boots chafed the skin and caused septic sores, until 6,000 pairs of trousers were issued. Wearing the boots and standing for long periods made men's feet swell, to the point that walking became almost impossible. Buses were brought up to Pozières to collect soldiers as they straggled back from the front line during a relief. Food containers proved too heavy to carry 2,000 yards into the front line and had to be replaced by Tommy cookers, cans of solidified alcohol with which soldiers could heat tins of food. Quartermasters improvised large numbers of extra cookers, so that the troops in the line could eat hot food when they pleased, but the improvements made little difference to sickness wastage. The division began to relieve battalions after 48 hours, with 24 hours rest before and after each period in the line. On the 11th of December, the front of the division was reduced to 2 battalions, with the front of each battalion area being held by a company and 2 Lewis gun crews. The strength of companies had declined to 50 to 60 men, so few and thinly spread. That of stray German soldier taken prisoner near a brigade headquarters had seen no sign of British troops until he was captured. In December and January, casualties due to enemy action were 439, far fewer than those due to the weather and illness. The division was relieved by the 2nd Division on the 12th of January. The 2nd Division, also transferred from the north side of the Ancre Valley, took over from the 51st Division on the 13th of January. On a front of 2,500 yards, 1,200 yards south of the village of Pays, the front line consisted of 18 infantry posts and support positions held by 10 platoons, with no positions behind until Courcelette, where 3 platoons were based, with 2 companies in the vicinity. Ironside Avenue, a communication trench, ran forward 800 yards towards the front line, but was so full of mud as to be impassable. Brushwood tracks, which were unusable in daylight, continued the route towards the front line. 2 battalions took over the front posts, with 2 more back towards Auvillers and La Bosselle, with the 15th Division on the right and the 18th Division on the left. The 2nd Division continued the consolidation begun earlier by the 51st Division, and large working parties labored non-stop to dig out, clean and pump trench, fit duckboards and provide overhead cover for the infantry posts in the front line. Tramways were built by engineers further back. Both sides were quiet during the rest of January, until the Germans attempted a raid which was stopped by machine gun fire. Before the raiders had passed through the German German barbed wire. On the north side of the valley, other British troops captured the rest of the Beaumont-Hamel spur. Conditions had been improved by the end of the month, although snowstorms covered such landmarks as existed and relieving parties frequently got lost. There was little artillery fire in the divisional areas but much German aircraft activity. British reconnaissance aircraft managed to photograph the front line on the 29th of January, giving the divisional commander the first accurate information about the position of the front line. The freeze lasted for about 5 weeks until mid-February, which made movement of carrying parties much easier, as preparations for the next offensive were being made. On the north bank of the Ancre, the 7th Division returned to the line after a month of rest and reorganization in Flanders. It had marched 82 miles south in rain and fog, before returning to the line on the 23rd of November, to relieve the 32nd Division and the right of the 37th Division along New Munich Trench. The trench ran northwest to southeast below the crest of Beaumont-Hamel spur, and Beaucourt Trench ran east from the south end of New Munich Trench. The British line was parallel to the German Munich Trench and Muck Trench. Conditions were worse, if possible, than those on the south side of the Ancre Valley, causing much sickness, despite precautions like rubbing whale oil into the feet to prevent trench foot and bringing dry socks up with the rations. One battalion had 38 men sick after a short period in the line. The temperature dropped several times in December, which began to harden the ground, but this brought torrential rains, which was an even worse ordeal. British casualties from snipers were frequent, and on one trench relief, the mud was so bad that a special rescue party had to be sent to dig out troops caught in the mud. Despite swift medical attention, a large number of men had to be taken to hospital and one soldier died of exposure. The area was covered with trenches, many of which were derelict, damaged, half-built or obliterated by artillery fire. Identifying the course of the front line or relating it to the map was impossible, as was the reconstruction of the front line, because trenches collapsed as soon as they were dug. Despite the conditions, raids were mounted by both sides, and a party of about 100 Germans was repulsed from New Munich Trench on the 25th of November. Despite the conditions, New Munich Trench was extended by the British to the north, and another 250 yards was dug to the south, in preparation for an attack on Munich Trench, as soon as conditions allowed. The British line was held by posts about 30 yards apart during the day, and on the 29th of November a German raid on an outpost failed. At the end of December, a sudden increase in the number of German prisoners being taken was noticed, partly because a new German division had arrived, partly due to men getting lost in the fog and stumbling into British positions, and partly because of an unusual willingness to surrender. 20 Germans were captured on the 1st of January, 29 prisoners taken on the 2nd of January, and another 50 prisoners were taken during the week, many of whom willingly gave themselves up. Raiding continued, and on the 1st of January, 2 officers on the way to Hope Post with the rum ration met a German attack coming down Serre Trench and had to struggle back to Despair Post. A hurried counter-attack failed against German machine gun fire, and another attempt was postponed until the evening of the 5th of January, when at 5:15 p.m. 500 times 9.2-inch 200 times 8-inch and 250 times 6-inch howitzer shells were fired at the post in 15 minutes. At 5:30 p.m., 50 British troops attacked up Serre Trench and along the ground on either side as fast as they could through the mud, and recaptured the post, taking 9 prisoners for a loss of 1 casualty. An attack by the 3rd Division on Post 88 to the left at the Somme also succeeded. German artillery fire was so severe that the British were forced back out but were able to return after the bombardment, before German infantry arrived and defended the post until they ran out of hand grenades and withdrew. The post was recaptured again and consolidated when a fresh supply of grenades arrived.